Hi, this is Mr. Waite. Today we're going to be going over the topic of photosynthesis for our review session. I always like Mr. Anderson, how he talked about photosynthesis, super important because it gives us two things that we need. First of all, it gives us food to eat in the form of sugars, and second of all, it gives us the byproduct of this is oxygen to breathe. So let's go ahead and look at the review packet, starting with question number 1. It says on here that photosynthesis has two separate processes that work together to convert solar energy into chemical energy, light dependent versus light independent. Which of the following statements is incorrect about the two processes? So the first thing I always do is I remind my students we need to circle the word incorrect. Incorrect is the one we're looking for. We're looking for the one that's false. So it says on here, during light reactions, light energy is converted into chemical energy, the form of ATP and NADPH. That is true. Don't forget, NADPH is an electron carrier, and because it's in the photosynthesis process, I always like to say this includes the P versus cellular respiration will just be NAD, NAD, and FAD. But this is photosynthesis, so we put the P in there. That's really not what it stands for, but it's an easy way to remember. It also says during light reactions, enzymes catalyze splitting of water as a molecule. Chlorophyll molecules absorb the electrons. Hydrogen ions are released into the thylakoid space, and oxygen gas is formed. That is also true. During the Calvin cycle, or the dark cycle, energy of ATP and NADPH is used to form carbohydrates, or G3P. That's correct as well. Last one, during the Calvin cycle, water is split, and that's where we kind of say, no, that part's not true, releasing oxygen gas. So this one would be the one that's false. D would be our correct answer here. Let's go on to the next one, or look at what we're supposed to review in this. I do tell my students that if you're going to memorize any images for the AP Bio test, this is a great thing to have memorized, and it's just reminding us all the things, that the two separate reactions happening within the chloroplast. We have the light reactions and the light independent, or the Calvin cycle over here. You should know the reactants and products for both. Know that light, water, NADP plus ADP plus PI are the reactants for this. What are the products? ATP, NADPH, and oxygen for the light reactions. And you should know the reactants and products for the Calvin cycle as well. ATP, NADPH, and don't forget carbon dioxide's going into that. And those are all being converted into NADP plus ADP plus PI, or the inorganic phosphate, and that's turning those into sugars. Keep in mind the light reactions here, taking light and converting it into our the energy molecules that are going to be providing energy for this process of turning carbon dioxide into sugars. Ultimately, that's how we get our organic compounds. All right, or our food to eat. Let's go to the next question here, number 2. Pigment molecules in the photosynthetic organisms absorb wavelengths of light. This person did the experiment to learn which wavelengths were the most effective. So we're looking at which wavelengths of light are the most effective at photosynthesis for this particular algae. They illuminated the algae with a light passed through a prism, exposing the different segments of algae to different wavelengths. He added aerobic bacteria, so we're using oxygen, and noted which areas of the bacteria congregated. So we're looking to see where are the bacteria congregating, as indicated by these dots down here. It says, what could Engelmann conclude about the congregation of bacteria in the areas of red light and blue light? So I want to come down here on the test. You're allowed to mark stuff. I say, okay, we see a red over here. We can see congregations of bacteria. And blue light, same thing. We're seeing they're congregating over here as well. So we look at this. It says, bacteria congregate in these areas due to an increase in the temperature of the red and blue light. If you look over here, temperature is not really a variable. And because of that, I'm going to cross A out. It says, next one, bacteria congregate in these areas due to an increase in temperature again. Their light intensity can increase the temperature, but again, we're not seeing anything about temperature over here. I'm going to look at part C. Bacteria congregate to these areas because these areas have the most oxygen. Keyword here is we see they are aerobic bacteria. These call it aerostatic bacteria, but they're aerobic bacteria up here consuming oxygen, and I do think it would be safe to say that if they're aerobic bacteria, there's probably high amounts of oxygen. I'm going to say maybe. Let's look at C or D. Bacteria are attracted to red and blue light, and thus the wavelengths are more, sorry, I can't quite, reactive than other wavelengths. we're not sure what type of reaction that is. So our best answer here would be C. What we're supposed to review with this one, we go down here, it says down here, this was a classic experiment that showed that red and blue wavelengths of light are the most effective for photosynthesis, and the key word that we already mentioned is the fact that they are aerobic bacteria. Scroll down just a little bit. They oxidize organic molecules in the presence of oxygen. That was kind of our key to let us know which answer was correct for that one. Let's go to question number 3. Consider 2 different algae types. Each type has the same number of chloroplasts, but their chloroplast distribution in the cell level varies. So we can see that they're very spread out up here versus down here, they're kind of congregating in the middle. Which of the following statements correctly describes which cell, so I like to highlight stuff, which cell would be the best suited for that last experiment we just looked at? Assume about 3 algae cells would cover the width of the visible spectrum on a microscope slide. Now, I pause for a minute and I look at these 2 cells just from observing which cells would be the best type for this experiment. Is it so that the chloroplasts are spread out or that they're congregated together? And when I asked my students this during the study session, it was kind of an obvious. The more spread out they are, the more likely they're being able to be hit by all the different wavelengths of light. Rather, some of these guys might be hidden back here and not quite get to see them. So we agreed that the top one would be the better of the 2. So then I go down here, and what you can do sometimes is even before you look at your option choices, cover up the answers and say, well, the answer I'm going to look for is going to be the one that is indicates the top the top algae would be the best. So I look at the answers down here, scroll down really quickly, and I can see that over here. For this one, excuse me, it says either of the 2 cells could be used because both are capable of absorbing light, producing oxygen. Yes, they both absorb light, but again, we feel like this one absorbs it better. So I'm going to say no to that one. B, either of the 2 cells could be used because they both contain the same number of chloroplasts. Did it say? Yeah, it did say they contain the same number, but again, some of those might be hidden back there. We can't quite see them. So we're going to say no to B. The top cell should be used, and that's what we agreed upon, because the arrangement of chloroplast allows for the entire length of the cell to respond to light. And remember, over here it said about 3 algae cells would cover the width of the visible spectrum. So this one is our correct one. The bottom cell should be used, and we already said no, that's not going to be an option. Stuff that we're going to review with this slide really quickly. I apologize for that. Let me get rid of that. Wavelengths of light. The bottom cell is obviously not suitable for this experiment. It wouldn't respond to all the different wavelengths of the visible spectrum because all those chloroplasts weren't available to be hit by the light. So all right, sorry about that. We're going to look at question number 4 really quickly. And what question number 4 is asking us about, it's this cyanobacteria. Let me get rid of some of this really quickly. Cyanobacteria, also known as blue-green algae, are responsible for the initial oxygenation of the Earth's atmosphere through photosynthesis. These bacteria are also thought to be precursors of chloroplasts found in true algae and plants. Photosynthetic pigments, cyanobacteria, include phycocyanin, the carotenoids, and chlorophyll. In contrast, with plant cells, so again, that was the true plants, plants today, these cells contain carotenoids and chlorophylls, but they do not contain phycocyanin. The absorption spectra of these pigments are shown in the graph, and remember, when we look at a light absorption graph, we can see here's the chlorophylls, they absorb blue lights, they absorb red lights, and we have down here the carotenoids, and they're absorbing the blue-green lights, not yellow, and that's pretty much it. And then here's the phycocyanins, who we can see right here, they're not absorbing the blues and purples or the reds. They're kind of over here in the yellow light wavelengths of light. And we see that plants don't have these anymore. And the question down here comes down here, says, what is the least likely explanation for why this phycocyanin pigment is no longer found in plants? Well, let's go through here and try to analyze which one. Again, we're looking for the least likely reason. Genetic drift eliminated pigments that reflect blue wavelengths of light. And so, well, we know that modern plants with their chlorophyll and their carotenoids can still absorb the blue spectrum up here. So I think that I like that one. I think that's true. I'm not going to, because it's true, I don't think it's a least likely answer. Natural selection favored organisms with pigments that reflect blue wavelengths of light, and we can see over here natural selection, it does say, are we favoring organisms that reflect this or absorb it? And basically down here, if natural selection we're choosing, natural selection, what we see today with our modern plants is that they absorb some of those blues and purples because of the chlorophyll pigments inside of there. So I'm not liking that one. I'm going to say maybe, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Let me put that back where it goes. I'm going to say maybe to letter B, mutations altered pigments used by the organisms. That could have happened. Chloroplast evolved from cyanobacteria with pigments that absorb mostly blue and red wavelengths. That could happen. So again, I'm going to circle B on this one. When we go to the review portion of this, we're supposed to look at is just remember how to read the absorption spectra. And again, I look at the y-axis, the dependent variable, showing me where the most light is absorbed. And up here on this upper x-axis, it tells me what colors those are. Now, if this were a black and white test, usually what they end up doing is showing you up here this color, these are the reds, these are the yellows, these are the blues. So obviously it's not in color, but you would still be able to tell which colors correspond with the different parts of the graph. So let's go ahead and look at our next one on here. Don't forget this as well. Pigments absorb free energy from light. I teach my students pigments are, really think of them as buckets that absorb specific types of wavelengths of light. So what's the purpose of that? Ultimately, in the role of photosynthesis, they're going to get those electrons and move them to higher energy levels so that they can be used further on in the reaction to pull those hydrogen ions across and ultimately drive the process of making ATP. If I keep going with this one, this question also hit upon this concept, and I tell my students, make sure you know what the endosymbiotic theory is before you go into the AP test. And that's this idea of at one time there was a cell that eventually, they're calling this a eukaryotic cell, but it engulfed this, what we think was a bacterium. That bacterium, instead of becoming inside here and digested by the lysosomes, became a part of that early cell. In fact, it continued to function. And if this one was green, what they're kind of referring to it as a chloroplast, it eventually started producing energy for the cell that the cell could take advantage of. Again, that's for chloroplast, but we also think the same thing, that'd be plant cells, but in animal cells and plant cells, we think this happened with mitochondria as well. All right, just a couple more minutes here. Let's try to get through at least one more question. Chemiosmosis, which is the process of producing ATP, says drives the synthesis of ATP in photosynthesis and cellular respiration. Which statement is incorrect about chemiosmosis? Again, I come over here and I want to make sure I'm looking for the statement that is incorrect on this one. The movement of electrons through the electron transport chain. In fact, you know what, before I go through this, let's just quickly review this idea of what chemiosmosis is before we choose some of these. And remember, photosynthesis, light hits photosystem 2, takes the electrons along here, and we are bringing hydrogen ions across here into the thylakoid space, and they're building up so that we get quite a few hydrogen ions. Eventually, we get this difference of high concentration to low concentration on the outside of hydrogen ions. These guys want to follow the rule of going from high concentration to low concentration. Their only way out of the thylakoid space is through this protein right here, the ATP synthase, and when they go through here, a complicated process spins this, and it takes advantage of those hydrogen ions going through there, converts ADP into ATP. So let's go back and look at our original question and see if that helps us answer any of these. And again, I have to remind myself, we're looking for the one that is incorrect on this one. I'm going to have to pause, and we'll go to the next movie.